Today is March the 6th, 2009. My name is Troy Lovett, and I'm here with Carrie Daniel, co-director of the Oral History Project at the University of Louisville. And we're honored for our second session to be with Mr. Jim Miller. Jim is a many-time course champion director, barbershop course champion director with the Thoroughbred course in Southern Gateway in Cincinnati. He's a champion member of quartets in the Barbershop Harmony Society. He's a member of the Hall of Fame of the Barbershop Harmony Society. He is both a collegiate, semi-pro, and professional baseball player in his past. He also was an outstanding high school and collegiate football player. He was an esteemed member of the United States Armed Forces in World War II, serving with distinction and also serving an extended period of time as a prisoner of war. In addition to all these things, he was a successful high school football coach, working with the likes of Paul Hornung and Howard Snellenberger. And to top all that off, he is an esteemed photographer. So, with a few of his attributes to set a background for the gentleman that we're talking to today, we are honored to be in his presence, and in this second session today, we want to continue with our conversation that we had about 3 weeks ago. And in that conversation, we talked a little bit about Jim's family, about his early years of growing up in Louisville, about some of the sights and sounds of the city during the 30s, during the Depression. We touched briefly on the flood of 1937. We may go back to that a little bit today. And we talked a little bit about some people who influenced him in his early life, mainly family members. And we spent an extended period of time with his baseball background. And that's where we want to pick up today. And I'm going to have Carrie start out with a question having to do with Jim's experience at the University of Louisville.
Yeah, this is a sort of broad question, but I'd love to hear about your experiences in athletics at U of L.
Well, I enrolled out to school in the spring semester of 1946, and I was immediately recruited by Coach Frank Camp about playing some football, and I really didn't feel comfortable, mostly from my family and everything. I had a device or something in my head at the time, right in the top of the head that the Germans had put in there, and with the equipment as it was in those days, the family and the doctors and everybody were a little bit leery about playing ball, and but I was cleared to play baseball, and I started playing the year of 1946 baseball with Coach John Hillman, who was the nicknamed affectionately Jolly John. He was so somber most of the time, and they called him Jolly John. And he was also athletic director at the university at the time. And it was quite a bit different in those days of playing baseball. Now they play 70, 75 games a year. And back then, I mean, our schedule was like maybe 20 games or 21 games. And travel, of course, was pretty much limited to wherever you could make it in a reasonable time by automobile. And so, I mean, we played like Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. We played, of course, University of Cincinnati, and on down into the KIAC colleges, Western and Eastern and Center and those kind of places. But you know, the travel to Florida and everything like that was, you know, just non-existent. And like I said, we only played about 20 games. But I had played quite a bit of baseball before on the high school level, and well, one very, very short professional level. And I found a whole new dimension in the game by playing with Coach Hellman. the first time I ever got somebody to approach the game with some semblance of purpose. I mean, instead of just going out there and swinging away at the bat or I became aware of the strategy that he used and the type of thing. And he, in addition to over and beyond the baseball thing, he was just a fantastic person. But getting to baseball in general there, I was very, very pleased and proud to play the seasons of 46, 47, and 48. And I'm sure that 46, 7, and 8, I'm sure of that, yeah. And they were very, very happy times for me, and not being the greatest student in the whole world and having a lot of other things on my mind. Baseball was the glue that I had to the university. I was married at the time already, and we didn't stay at dormitories or anything like that. My fraternity didn't have a chapter out there, and I was kind of adopted by the Phi Delta guys, and so baseball was the real connection, other than going to class, and they were good years for me. I mean, it probably some of the best baseball I ever played was those 3 years. There were some wonderful people involved with those teams out there. Some of the guys in there from the Navy program in 1946 went on to, for bigger and better things. Not particularly in baseball, but on into the service and in business and everything. So it was a good time for me. Anything more specific than that? You're talking about some of the incidents or things?
Well, and you mentioned to me in another setting of three persons who had a great influence on you at the University of Louisville. Let's talk about those three men.
Well, the three people, like I said, were of course Coach Hellman and Coach Pep Capeman, who was the basketball coach, and Coach Dave Lawrence, who was involved with several things out there, with track and these guys were all. I think Coach Lawrence was an outstanding person at the University of Kentucky in his undergraduate days, and at the university out there, everybody at that time were pretty kind of doubling up with different jobs, and wasn't as specialized as it is right now.
Yeah.
Of course, there was no budgets like there is right now either. I don't know how to specifically say anything. This is what Coach Hickman did, and this is what Coach Lawrence did, and this is what Coach Hellman did. The fact is that they were there so much. I think the biggest thing was in just talking, having counseling with them. This wasn't a formal counseling situation with the university. As far as I know, there was none at the time. Just a little bull session, or traveling on the road on the way to a game, that type of thing. It always got into something that was very, very important to me. Either in my very, very young married life going on at that time, or how to get past a certain course in school, or that type of thing. Coach Hellman, like I said, I had been married the previous summer in 45 and started the school. I think I started in school in the fall of 45. At the fall semester, maybe so. I really can't remember that exactly what it was, but being newly married and everything like I was, Coach Hellman would. I had a car that I was one of the drivers that would go to the games when you'd take 4 or 5, every 3 or 4 guys in a car, and that's the way we traveled. And he always had Rosemary go. Rosemary went to all the baseball games when we went out of town. I don't know whether she was what you call a student manager or whatever you want to call her, but he saw to it that she went to all the games, which was kind of appreciated back in those days, being the newlywed, so to speak. And so, like I said, these 3 guys probably made school bearable for me and let me really see the value of just being in school. Because I could have very easily said, hey, my family was in the local trucking and commercial warehousing business and right successful at the time, and I really wasn't worried too much about what I was going to be doing or anything like that. And they just kept me nailed down.
Let's talk a little bit about what it was like to come back. Here you are with many of your compatriots, veterans, who have just come back from fighting in the war.
Yeah.
You've seen life in a way that undergraduate students didn't even imagine. And so you're coming back to college with all this experience. You've been in Europe, you've traveled around everywhere, you've been stationed in the United States in several places, and here you are coming back as a college student. What was that like? What was it like to be a student in 1945-46?
Well, the first thing that I can remember is that this is such a benign existence all of a sudden. I mean, there was no frenzy, there was no urgency. We took a little bit of adjusting to think that, look, I don't have to run here, I can walk over here, this is not something that has to be done right now. I can do this tonight and work on it tomorrow, or that type of thing. I think that the biggest adjustment that you had to make was to say, am I going to stick this out? I have to say that with rare exceptions, with a rare exception, that faculty were so amenable to what the problems were with the guys coming back. It seemed that they made an awful lot of adjustments to one of the things that this doesn't have a whole lot to do with anything, but it gives you just a little bit of an idea. Back then there was a nationally known theater critic that was on the faculty of U of L, and his name was Boyd Martin, and he headed up the drama department, and he was nationally known. And he did a class on public speaking that I took 2 terms of this as public speaking class and became quite attached to him. He was very sophisticated type of humor. You had to really think about it, and when you thought about what he just said, and maybe an hour later, it was absolutely, hilarious, and but he also did a class called Current Theater and Film, and it was typical trip thing. A 1-hour class, a 1-hour credit, and met once a week, and and we would take. I don't mean to digress in all these different dressings and everything, but what you did, you get a mimeograph form from the registrar's office, and you look, and these are the requirements for your degree. and you check them off as you finish up with some others, you know. And at one time, I know that I had a 100 course and a 200 course and a 300 course and a 400 course all in the same semester, and just to get a class at a certain time, you know. And then if it was on there, you checked it off, and if it wasn't on there, you could go into your elective type file. And that's the way we, you know, kept what we were doing. I'll tell you a little incident then when it came time for a degree. I'll tell you that in a minute too. So anyway, this was in the spring semester, and I was playing baseball at the time. And what you would do is that if you had a baseball game that conflicted with one of your classes, the athletic department gave you a card, and you filled out this card, and then they saw to it that it got to the faculty person, and he gave you an excused absence. And it just so happened that during this particular spring, it was a whole lot of baseball games was coincidental with that class. And so I missed a lot of those classes. And somehow or other, I don't know how it was, somehow or other, he didn't get the cards, and he gave me an F in this class. And it so happened that there was another fellow by the name of Thompson who was out and out genius. I mean, this guy was intellectually, I mean, one of the real high echelon people. He went on to become a big man in Internal Revenue Administration and everything. And he was just really and somehow or other, he got crossed up too. He wasn't an athlete or anything, but he got crossed up with his attendance too, and he got an F. So we went to see Mr. Martin about that F, and he says, well, okay, I understand there might be a mix-up in this and that and everything. I'll tell you what I do. They had a play going on at the time. He says, the play closes Saturday night, and you come to the play and help us strike the sets and take everything down, and we'll get you passing. And so, well, we decided that we were going to do this, and we'd go ahead and do this. And so somehow or other it came up in conversation and say, hey, did he get you all to say he's going to strike the sets? Yeah, we did. Well, and, you know, what do you figure on? Well, I figure we'd probably be there a couple hours. He says, let me tell you something, pal. You're going to be there all night and into the next day. Well, we decided for a 1-hour course that we weren't going to do that. And so we didn't show up for that, and we got F's in the real crip course from Boyd Martin, I think. Oh, he was a nationally known, wonderful guy. And but that was my F that I got at the U of L. Was that situation with Boyd Martin and Lunch Thompson. And to this day, Lunch and I talk about that about that F that we got. He had genius.
Showed a lot of character, in my opinion.
Yeah. There were another gentleman at the university who was the professor that began what is now the School of Business, and which is very highly ranked. The School of Business is ranked, and his name was Dr. John Kraft. And he was into the business of publishing. I mean, he was writing books and everything, I guess as professors do, or they supposed to do maybe or something, but he was writing books. And he wrote a couple of books about marketing and one thing or another like that, and I know that he got some of the paperwork from my dad's company and published them as examples of things about bonded warehouse receipts and negotiable stuff like that, and a few other things that included in 2 books that he had. I got them around someplace. I don't know where they are, but I got them around someplace. And So there were some really some wonderful people there that I think some of them were, I didn't always see eye to eye with, but they were always reasonable. There's only one guy there that I don't even bring up anything negative, but there was one professor there that was so far on the left-hand side of the ledger with a name by the name of Birdwhistle was his name. And he was a little bit far out for me, and I had to really tighten up the, in the class to, keep my mouth shut.
Jim, what about maybe referring to the movie The Best Years of Our Lives? What was your we're going to spend some time on the war at another time, but when you came back to Louisville and you're married and you're probably didn't even know you'd be alive, what was your mindset in terms of psychologically, as far as coming back from the war and your experiences? What you mentioned a second ago about how all of a sudden you don't have to run to this situation, or you're not got somebody giving you an order and this type of thing. What would you? How would you characterize yourself in those
Well,
things?
I guess maybe you might say that I was I don't know what you call them, maybe being typical or just the opposite. But I never had any of these so-called problems that you read about and talk and hear so much about, the psychological problems that guys had from coming back from the war. I wasn't overseas all that long, and I mean I wasn't over for 2 or 3 years or anything like that. Well, I was over there. I'd say it was a little eventful, but it wasn't. I guess I wasn't subjected to it. Like month after month after month. But when I came back, I just had a feeling of relief that I was back, and I had some trouble sleeping, a little bit. I had a couple of silly things happen. I mean, an airplane making the strong sound of a close by propeller airplane, when a zoom type thing. A sudden noise like that would kind of send me a little scurrying a little bit or jumping. But as far as having any deep psychological problems or fears or thing, I just didn't have it. If somebody wanted to talk about it, I didn't have any problems talking about the war. Never have, and still don't. There's a couple of things I never have ever told. But as far as generally just talking about it, I didn't. Okay, I don't want to talk. Don't ask me this, or nobody had to say about it. Don't ask Jim about this, or don't talk. And I just didn't have any problems like that. Mm-hmm. And I guess that was. I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't smart enough to have those kind of problems, because. But I really never did. And so when I came back, I was grateful for having gotten back. I was grateful for everything that I had. I had a job there waiting for me with a family business, and we're an old married man at 20 years old, and that was the big thing, of course. The responsibility of a marriage didn't give you a whole lot of time to feel sorry for yourself or to go into a shell or anything like that. And because that lady was some vivacious person back there. That's a story in itself, man.
I agree with you 100%.
Oh my.
Jim, let's go back and kind of, I want to touch on a couple of things in the 30s, and then we'll jump back to the area we're talking about. But I know there was a big influence on your life from the vaudeville situation in the time of the 30s. We talked about that a little bit the first time, and I wanted you to, was there anything else that we need to hear from you about vaudeville, about how that affected you and how it influenced you?
Yeah, like my mother's family was two of her sisters were in vaudeville. One of the sisters married a vaudevillian. Their son and daughter, my first cousins, were featured performers in the Broadway world. I say featured. I may say that they did some specialty things and never were the star, so to speak. But I mean, they were involved with Broadway stuff, and they took their own troupe on the road as an improvement of their life in Broadway. I mean, they had I think probably, as I remember, it was about a 10-piece orchestra, and what they called a killer line of girls, 7 or 8 girls in the backup dancing role, and then they as the featured performance, and then they traveled all over and did very, very well. But then, around 1930, plus or minus a year on either side, there's a lot of things happened, and radio came in, and all of a sudden vaudevilles went right down the drain, right down the tubes, and that's what brought it more or less of an influence on almost everything that I did at one time or another. Somewhere along the line, there was some performances involved, either with that side of the family, or with mom and her 2 sisters, or my dad was involved with early use of electronic equipment. He had one of the very first sound systems that was ever in the city of Louisville, and one of the things he tried to do, and so there was always that type of influence with me and our whole family for that.
Did you feel that at some specific moment, or was it just a general feeling that performance was a part of who you were? In other words, that had to affect you pretty deep.
Yes, and I guess that I used to think that everybody somewhere along the line felt like they'd like to give show business a whirl at one time or another. And with me, it was it became a very, very simple situation. I kind of felt like at one time that that there were things that I could do, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being on the stage, and I enjoyed, doing that type of thing. And it all, when it finally came right back down to it, it all came right down to one joy. Do you want to give up the family life, a home, a family, a relative amount of stability in your life, or do you want to be living out of a suitcase on the road going this, which is what it was. And with me, and I just didn't want to give up, the family situation in order to make the plunge into that type of thing. I gave it a thought. Let me digress just a little bit here. Again, since you brought this up, this is where barbershop became such a big factor in my life. Because all of a sudden, barbershop gave me, I was fortunate enough to sing with a reasonably good quartet that we traveled all over the country, and doing shows 25 and 30 weekends a year. And for all practical purposes, I had the best of both worlds going. I still had my family life going, had a weekend show to do. That's why it became so important to me, and why I appreciated it so much.
Absolutely.
And I think I really think everybody somewhere back in there, you think I maybe could do this, But then cooler heads prevail, and you start thinking about the warm house and all.
Well, 2 instances. You told me one time that you had a very brief career as a clarinet player, I believe.
Oh, my.
I'd like to kind of hear that story.
Yeah,
I think Carrie might like to hear that.
Like I said, music was and is very important, to us back in those days, and I had taken piano lessons for 2 or 3 years, and played the piano a little bit, and but I was having trouble with all those notes you had to read at the same time. I didn't figure out how to do that. And that was bothering me. And I kind of admired my cousin who was studying reed instruments, clarinet and one thing or another. And he only had one note to read. And man, I kind of appealed to me. And I followed the thing and started taking clarinet lessons. Now, you took clarinet lessons at a big music store down on 4th Street, and Wurlitzer Music Company. Of course, everybody's heard of Wurlitzer. I mean, with their electronics and the record players and everything that they made. But they had this retail store down there, sold musical instruments and everything like that. And I started taking clarinet lessons, and it was going all right, going pretty good. And so every Sunday morning they had a radio show that they participated in, along with a young person's retail clothing store would sponsor this thing along with Wurlitzer's, where they would showcase music students. And so they came to and said, well, we're going to put you on the radio to play a clarinet solo. And I'll never forget, the song was Liebestraum. Nothing to it. It was pretty easy. That's all. And so it's on a Sunday morning, and it was done right out of the store down there. And I get down to the broadcast down there, and the store's all locked up with the exception of this one room set aside as a studio. And they let me in down there, opened up my clarinet case, and the first thing I did was to split the reed on the clarinet. And I didn't have another reed, and they couldn't get into all the store was locked up down there. The drawers and everything were locked up. Nobody could get into it. So my teacher used one of mine. Now he's a professional, see, and the reed I used was just almost just flopped around a little bit, I guess, and his was like stiff as a board. And so I had to use one of his reeds, and it was, man, you really had to put out to make it even do anything happen. And so it came time for me to go on the TV, on the radio, and I started the song on Liebestraum, and I got about 4 or 5 measures into that baby, and boy, I let one of the most horrendous squeaks you ever heard in your life. And then it just started to build on it, Every other note was squeak. And I made a real fool out of myself, and that was the last of the clarinet. And my first cousin, we did a lot of things together, and he went on to become a real fine musician, and one of the top musicians locally that was ever around here. And I just didn't quite make it.
So Benny Goodman rested easy.
Benny Goodman, I wasn't.
Well, let's talk about another aspect that I knew you for quite a long time without really knowing this about you. And when I found out about you, I was one of the most impressive things I'd heard, and that is that you were a dancer.
Uh-huh.
And that part of it has always been a fascinating part of your background. So tell us a little bit about how that came about and so on.
Well, you know how it goes. I've told you my cousin that was in vaudeville, and when vaudeville broke up, and my one cousin, her brother went to Hollywood and became involved with technical stuff out there. And she came back to Louisville and opened up a professional dance studio. And it was a different type of studio than what you see for the most part, where they have recitals now. You know, have little kids, 3 years old, 2 years old, 25 of them across the stage dancing, you know, and they go out and this was more on a level to train people that were going to do this professionally. And she had older people involved. And although I wasn't one of those, but I was, you know, in preteens, and so there was a conflict between, I like to play sports, and my mother was in show business of a sort, and she wanted me to get involved with dancing, and so it kind of became a pact between my mother and Dad that she wouldn't make any noise about my playing sports or anything like that if he didn't make any noise about my taking dancing lessons, which there's a certain amount of stigma involved with that for a guy back in those days. And so that was the pact between my mother and Dad. Play sports, I took dancing. And so that's what I did. I started, and I don't mind telling you, I did it all. I mean, I did tap, I did tap, acrobatic, ballet, believe it or not, and ballroom. When you come back, I forgot to do it, but I'll show you. I'll show you a couple of pictures back from those days.
Great.
And you won't believe it. But I did it all, and we, like I said, and it was one of the, really, I think, a very, very valuable thing, because of the physical part of it was horrendous compared. I mean, outside of the contact, much harder than playing baseball or football. I mean, except from the physical contact and conflict. I mean, it was different. But from a demand of just conditioning and everything, it was. But I did, like I said, I did it all. I became a pretty good tap dancer, and my cousin and I had a song and dance act that we had when we were, that we did at some of the nightclubs here in town back when we were, like 13, 14, 15 years old. And that was something that, and the way I look right now, it doesn't pretend, but you go back to maybe when I was there or something like that, you could understand.
Absolutely.
Or maybe like up there, you could understand. I could move pretty good.
Talk about the nightclub business a little bit. You and your cousin, and how did that happen?
We took some of the routines that we had learned at the dancing school for the reviews that she had, and we put together a little song and dance act. We both played a little guitar, and he played the piano by ear, and we had an act where we did some songs and dances, and I mean, we do a song and break into a dance, and we had about a little 30-minute show that we could do, and little comedy thrown in, like, I passed by your house the other day. Why didn't you stop in? Well, I didn't know where you lived, Isn't that terrible? So, but it was just patter going along through some, song and dance, play a little guitar, do a little soft shoe, or a little buck dance.
Remember some of the names of the nightclubs? Anything?
Yeah, there was the biggest one we danced at was. Are you familiar with any of the area around the State Fairgrounds, Eastern Parkway area? there's an area, Bradley Avenue, right back, is all of it's out of existence right now. Bradley Avenue, there's a road back there. There's a big nightclub back there called the Flamingo, and they had a big outdoor dance floor. And when I say big, I mean I'm talking about maybe 150 feet by 150 feet big. Outdoor dance. And they had tables all around that and everything, bandstand, and that was one that we worked at. Then there was another one. I don't think any of these would be in existence right now. There's another one called the Barn, and I'm trying to think of the one there's one out on Bardstown Road. Oh, you asked me. I should have. If I'd have known about this, I could have figured out. There was 2 or 3 places, and they were just small clubs. Mm-hmm. And then there was the Madrid Ballroom, which is at 3rd and Guthrie. And I think the building is still there and everything. It's been several things, but it had one of the big 1930s ballrooms that you'd see, and we would perform for different things. We performed there 2 or 3 times.
What about the club that was, and I can't think of the name either, maybe Carrie can, one that's out at Iroquois Park?
Oh, yeah. Well, there was 2 clubs out there. There was one, Colonial Gardens. Colonial Gardens.
Yeah.
And the other one was Iroquois Gardens. And now they were above the echelon with us because they brought in the big stuff. Mm-hmm. They brought in the big bands. Dorsey, Glenn Miller came in there. So that was above the echelon where we said we were, the act you got for $50. And but that was the 2 out there. They were extremely. They're having a big fire. Still part of that. Colonial Gardens is still in existence out there. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, I believe they're having some problems, or not problems, but some arguments about whether or not some people want to take it down and other people want to preserve it.
Yeah.
And that was a.
You mentioned Dorsey and Glenn Miller and so on. The dance band era in the 30s was awfully big, wasn't it? And
30s
and 40s and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Talk about a little bit of that in Louisville. You mentioned that Tommy Dorsey was here and so on.
I can give you a little bit of insight on that. The venues were Colonial Gardens and Iroquois Gardens would bring in a band of that stature. The Rialto Theater would also bring in bands of that stature. Now they would bring them in with along with a movie, but these were big houses. The Rialto Theater probably seated 3,000 people down there on 4th Street. The Palace, where the Louisville Orchestra plays right now, believe it, didn't really bring any of that. The Rialto was the big one. So there was the movie houses that brought them in. Iroquois Garden and Colonial Gardens brought them in, and then they would come in for private dances, which would be like at Madrid Ballroom or the Brown Hotel or the hotel ballrooms. But they got in here. And in those three places, my uncle, my dad's brother, was the manager of a big dance hall down in the West End, so right by Fountain Ferry Park. Mm-hmm. Does Fountain Ferry Park mean anything to you?
It does, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that was a big thing, and right on the edge of it, they had a big outdoor dance floor, and of course an indoor. Each one of them had small clubs inside, but their big outdoor dance floor was one called Gypsy Village, and he was the manager of that down there, and let's see, he went to the Army in 1941, and he was a manager like 37, 38, 39 there, and he brought in the stuff that was right under the big town, right under the Dorseys and the Millers and the thing, the Horace Heights and the Sammy Kays, you know, that were just right underneath. He got some of those in down there for that. So that's where they generally played. Gypsy Village, Madrid Ballroom, Iroquois, and then private dances.
That's a fascinating time. And you mentioned the vaudeville and the dancing and the fact of what that did for you as an athlete.
Yeah.
I was reminded that, you know, a lot of professional football teams in the last few years have said, wait a minute, if we can take these big 300-pound linemen and teach them a little ballet and teach them a little bit of movement as far as dance steps, we'll make them better linemen. So you were kind of ahead of the game.
They've proven that to be true, and of course, there were just so many things that were just so easy for me to do on the collegiate level as well as on the high school level, just simply on account of that training. And they found out that's why, you know, this day and age, you know, back in my day, a 300-pound guy was just shunned aside. I mean, he couldn't do anything. 6'10", 6'11", 9 guys, nobody fooled with them because they were awkward. They couldn't. They just didn't get the job done. But here they go now. They got 300-pound guys, 6'5", that can do a 4.6 or 4.7 40-yard, you know, and dance around like like anything. 250-pound linebackers that can move laterally, you know, do all these kind of things. And most of it, it may not have been called what we're talking about, but somewhere along the line, the drills they did, which they called like agility drills or things like that, were glorified dance steps.
Sure.
And so I found out, I've been asked the question an awful lot, you know, boy, well, how about back in our day, we were a lot tougher. Well, what would you do? What would it be if one of these teams, they had to pay teams like you played with? And I tell them, they beat us to death. And they're bigger, they're faster, they had better coaching, and they're stronger. Every which way they got you beat, you know. Yeah. And they'd say, well, you know, well, I don't know whether they'd be any tougher. Well, I don't say they're any tougher. They're not any tougher or anything like that, but they're just better at what they do. Yeah. And so what you got your finger on the pulse of it right there. There's just well, you take there was a certain guy, Lynn Swan, the professional. He was an accomplished ballet dancer.
Yes, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Oh, it cost you a little bruised up muscles every now and then, a little black eye occasionally. But it was worth it.
It was worth it.
It was worth it.
Let's finish the first hour by talking a little bit about high school. What you went to St. X.
Yeah. And
talk a little bit about St. X in those days and your experiences there.
St. X in those days was staffed completely by a religious order, the Xavier Order of Brothers, and I say to this day that in my job, not some time back, I was very, very close to St. X in the modern day era, and I've never run into a more dedicated, intelligent group of faculty that they have out there. But always you did say that a St. X student that wasn't taught by the brothers, they missed something. And because these guys were, they were a religious order, and they didn't have anything particular except that what they were doing, and that was teaching boys. And they, if you needed to be knocked around, they knocked you around, and which they did. And it was a discipline that, there was a certain discipline that that kind of sticks with you for an awful long time. For some, back in those days, discipline was just about the same in public school too.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody you didn't mess around too much in public school.
Either way. Well, since you were a model student and never got in any trouble or anything like that, what was all that like in terms of when you went to school every day? You felt like you were.
I never got in any of the big trouble. I frankly, because of two reasons. First is I didn't want those brothers knocking around on me, and the other thing was I didn't want anything to happen to me at home. It was a known fact that if I got problems at school with the brothers or something like that, don't come home with it, because whatever they're going to do at school, they was going to get it at home too. And I was involved with certain pranks, and things like that, but never anything that was big time bad. Of course, you just didn't last. I mean, they'd give you a certain amount of leeway and give it a shot on trying to get you straightened out, but if you didn't, out you go.
Let you go. Yeah.
And right now at St. X, and I think costs like $7,000 or $8,000 a year to go to St. X. And back when I went there, it was $10 a month, $90 a year to go to St. X. And it was down there at 2nd and Broadway down there in that old building down there, and it was just great. It was great. Yeah.
And you began playing football at what time at St. X?
I started playing football as a freshman as soon as I went in down there. St. X had 3 different echelons. They had a freshman team. They had a freshman team called the Kittens, and then there was a junior varsity team called the Cubs, and then of course the varsity were the Tigers, Kitten, Cubs, and Tigers. And I started playing football right as soon as I went in there as a freshman, and I was 125 pounds, something like that, and I played with the freshman team with the Kittens, and that next year as a sophomore moved up to the junior varsity, and I played all 4 years there, and I played football 4 years, played baseball 4 years, and I was on a track team my senior year, and I got letters in football, letters in baseball, and one in track, and I was a shill in track. I mean, that was a joke. I mean, but it was pretty good. We won a state championship in baseball in my senior year, and it never really had the facilities. My freshman year at St. X, we had no place to. I mean, we dressed on the open out there, hung our clothes on a nail on a fence. I mean, there wasn't any place in the locker room. The locker room was a ramshackle old wooden building in there, and the guys used to bring coal from home to put in the stove. Then, when I got to be a senior, they finally got their first locker room. The field we had was at Clay in Kentucky out there. Okay. But now it's an apartment complex now, and so we really didn't have any facilities out there. Had the baseball diamond was out there. We played out there in a practice field for football, and but it was a great time.
Who were your main rivals in football?
Oh well, see, it was Male Emanuel.
Male Emanuel. Okay.
Male Emanuel. In the city of Louisville, there was only 3 schools, and there was no. It was not co-ed. Male, Emanuel, and St. X were 3 high schools, and then there were county schools, you know, at Anchorage and at Fairdale and Valley. They were still there. They were there, but they were just down a run or 2. So there was Male Emanuel and St. X, and then there on the private side, there were girls' academies. Some of them still exist today, but all the public schools were segregated schools too. Girls' high school was actually Halleck Hall, was out there right near where the university is right now, which is now Emanuel High School. As part of their facility was, you know, their old facilities was Halleck Hall, and that was a girls' school. I'm trying to think. Atherton was a girls' school.
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
Atherton was a girls' school.
Wasn't Shawnee a girls' school?
Shawnee was a girls' school.
Uh-huh.
So, and it was late 50s before they went co-ed.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was late 50s, middle 50s anyway. So, as far as the, we played Male Emanuel and St. X. Paducah Tilghman was a big one on our thing. Owensboro, to a lesser extent, Central City. That's
Any Lexington schools? Did you play a Lexington school?
Lexington schools. No, not very much. Not very much back in those days. Danville, but there was Henry Clay High School up there, and Lafayette High School.
Yeah, that was about it.
And they were co-ed. They were co-ed. Louisville's the only place I believe that had everything segregated like that. And the Male Emanuel football game on Thanksgiving Day was legendary. I mean that was a nationally known game back in those days. It was a shame when that game deteriorated like it did during. As a matter of fact, there was a couple of times when I'm not so sure they even played. And when they did, it was like the 3rd or 4th game of the season. When it came in with desegregation and everything, and the busing, that's when things really started to deteriorate in the public schools.
Yeah.
And but that game was, oh man, the schools were only about 2 blocks apart. Both of them right along Brook Street. One at Brook and Breckenridge, and one at Brook and Oak. I mean, they're 3 or 4 blocks apart. And on Thanksgiving weekend, I mean, they'd be fighting. They'd be fighting all along Brook Street. They'd be fighting all day long. And but it was when I say that, I didn't mean it was wholesome. It was wholesome. And
great rivalry.
And of course, back in those days, Emanuel was carried the name of DuPont family for some reason, and its name, Emanuel High School, kind of put it in the realm of, they had shop and mechanical drawing and pretty much that type of thing. Male was more of the prep school then. Now, of course, Emanuel is the school.
Yeah.
And what can you say? I mean, all those merit scholars and everything, they sure get the job done. But and St. X would never quite, just every now and then, we just never could quite come up to their level in sports. One of the bigger, of course, big reason was that even back in those days, that light tuition, it still kept a lot of kids,
Absolutely.
From going to St. X. And I mean, every time I play a football game with with Male or Manual, I'd be looking across at a whole bunch of knee benders. Yeah. And,
Okay, Jim, we're gonna call a stop here for a second, and I'll
Okay.